To everyone who's here, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, forever. Welcome to the webinar. Welcome to This is Recruiting. And today we have a very special webinar here today, which is Building Healthcare Tech with Indegene. So if you're joining us for the first time, This is Recruiting is a webinar series that we at HackerEarth have created to bring to you industry experts from across the globe to share their stories and insights when it comes to recruiting and hiring. And if you're joining us for the first time and hearing about HackerEarth for the first time, we are leaders in technical hiring, and we do this because we have an entire suite of products that helps you across your tech hiring lifecycle. We help you with attracting and sourcing developers, screening them, interviewing them through our Face Code platform, upskilling as well as engagement through our hackathons and hiring challenges. If you want to know more about HackerEarth, and you will because we will be telling you way more about it throughout this webinar and later on as well, you can visit hackerearth.com/recruit. I will put the link up shortly. But before we get into that, and to give you more of why we're here today and about our esteemed panelists as well, we have Nitin Khurana, the Global Talent Acquisition Head today at Indegene, as well as Tarun Mathur, the Chief Technology Officer at Indegene, and moderating this webinar, we have our very own CTO today as well, Vishwastam Shukla. And I'm going to let Tarun and Nitin, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in the space so far and all the exciting things that Indegene is up to these days, especially when it comes to healthcare technology, before we get into the main questions from our webinar.
So nice to connect with everybody. So in my role at Indegene, we certainly are in charge of looking at the technology assets and IP development that supports the healthcare sector. And our specific role is working with large enterprises, mostly in the pharmaceutical and medical device space. And so within that area, as I'm sure you can imagine, drug discovery, research, manufacturing, commercialization, post-market surveillance, these are all very important business functions at pharma. Meanwhile, globally, there's a lot of pressure to innovate faster, get drugs to market faster. There's a lot of issues around drug safety and appropriateness, and of course, cost pressures, right? There's a lot of pressure on how do we bring down the cost of drugs, how do we make it more accessible. So all of these are tied to the roles and responsibilities within the drug life cycle. And Indegene is plugged into pretty much all of those parts of the life cycle. So from early drug discovery, we support certain aspects of that, in particular, things like clinical trials, all the way through a drug after it's gone to the market. How do you monitor and make sure that any safety issues, adverse events that may occur from the utilization of the drug are captured, reported, and factored back into the prescribing information so that doctors are aware of issues that may arise once a drug comes to market. So it's a great journey, but it's 50% technology, but it's 50% domain understanding. And so you really don't have a real viable business unless you understand what the outcomes that you're seeking for are from a business perspective. And in healthcare, we have a great deal of empathy for what patients are going through, what caregivers are going through, and even what the business side is dealing with, right? And so that at Indegene, we factor all of those elements together and think about what solutions help to solve those things I issued, that I mentioned around drug cost and timeliness and safety. And we provide a number of services and solutions to that end. So it's been an exciting journey. Especially, I'm sure everyone here is aware of the kind of innovation that happened during the COVID development. Those vaccines were developed and created in record time using brand new techniques and launched at scale. And that opened the eyes for a lot of people in the healthcare arena and a lot of the drug manufacturers. And by opening eyes, that means it basically let them start looking more aggressively at innovation and R&D. Historically, this business has been fairly conservative, right? They're in a race to be number two. But today, that mindset has changed. They're seeing the benefit of true innovation, and the technology enablers are there. And there's also a lot of news around recent innovations in the AI and in other tech domains. So when you put all of these things together, you almost have a trifecta. You basically have the perfect combination between industry pressure, business pressure, and enablers. All those three things have come together, and that's fueling Indegene's growth. So it's a great time for technical people who want to understand and be deeply involved in a domain and really understand it well. And it's a great time for people in the business and SME side as well, because they're able to utilize their knowledge in more innovative and compelling ways. So that's what we've been up to, the 30,000 foot story.
I'll completely echo with what Tarun mentioned. I think some of the fundamentals still stay there, and now we're in part of the gig economy as such. So there is no specific industry that's not touching the other. So while healthcare and technology has been involved, there are multiple aspects where technology is getting implemented, not specifically the tech roles as such, but the involvement and the injection of the technologies there in practically every segment for that matter. And that's what we really tend to bring as value to our clients as well.
Nitin, why don't you go ahead and also talk about, a little bit about yourself and how you've grown the company itself, right? I know that you've grown Indegene by over 300% in just a few years that you've been here. So we'd love to hear a little bit about that too.
Sure, absolutely. I've been with the company for almost 3 years, looks like 3 decades, more than my overall experience. I've been in the TA space, which happens to be my area of passion, over 2.5 decades, worked with organizations like Dell, SR, and with Genpact and Headstrong. When Indegene happened, I was highly excited because healthcare and health tech segment per se is the next big wave for the next 1 or 2 decades or more for that matter, right? And getting to work in that space, bringing in talent and creating that whole ecosystem of talent supply chain rather was what really drove me towards Indegene. And I think the overall culture and the innovation that we support and stuff is absolutely fantastic. It's extremely viral, if I were to put it that way. And that's what really propelled me towards Indegene. And every day has been new. Like you rightly mentioned, I think 300% is one story. There are multiple success stories. There are new benchmarks that we've set in terms of not only bringing in talent, nurturing them, and setting up a culture altogether. I think this space has been extremely exciting, and the way the company promotes the entire piece is absolutely fantastic. No doubt, veterans like Varun have been there in the company for over 2 decades, right? So I've still to do a lot of catch up with Tarun for that matter. But then, yes, that's how it's exciting been.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Vishy now because we have a set of questions that came in from both our recruiter as well as our developer community, and we've compiled them, and Vishy will be moderating the session going forward. And thank you so much to everyone in the audience. A few housekeeping rules. If you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A box on your panel there, or you can send it to us on the chat. And we will address it either towards the end of the webinar or during if it is applicable to the question. Okay, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, for all the introductions, Tarun and Nitin, and giving us the context and the a little bit about our ecosystem in which you guys are operating currently. I can sense a lot of excitement that is there. Despite you guys being industry veterans, I see that there is a lot of potential that you guys are just, sort of sitting on top of and kind of trying to tap into. I think that's just the nature of innovation that we've seen in the industry. So, we'll obviously go over the questions, but I just wanted to share that there is a palpable sense of excitement that I can sense as well while talking to you guys. And it's great. I think it's coming right off from the things that you're talking about. So let's move on. Actually, let's start with the questions. Nitin, how about we start with you? You have tons of experience in the PA domain, like you said, and for the past 3 years, I'm guessing you are pitching Indegene as a great tech organization or a health tech organization to your candidates. Actually, let's start with that first. I mean, do you mind sharing with our audience? And of course, we are going to be sharing this, later on our social media and etc. Right? Do you think you think of Indegene as a tech company? do you think of Indegene as a health sector, health domain company, or do you think of Indegene as, tech first health? So do you want to kind of, just give us some view on that?
Sure. See, I think Indegene is born out from the healthcare industry as such. And we know this industry has been growing steadily, and clearly the pandemic had pushed the growth further. And like I mentioned, the next decade or so, it would continue to grow at a faster pace. Combined with technology, I think it has given its wings of acceleration, and clearly the industry is adopting technology at a much higher pace than what it was doing earlier. And considering that it's going to be a 1.6 trillion industry in the next couple of years, I think it has the right composition of the making. And what better than hiring tech through technology? I think that's our given mantra at the end of the day. So we're clearly a health tech organization. Like Tarun mentioned, domain is at the core for sure, but there is technology that is getting involved in practically every sphere for that matter. Right, whether it is medical, non-medical campaigns, so a lot of things that we do for the healthcare industry, it has its inputs and it has its connecting nodes practically in every segment for that matter. So it wouldn't be right to just call it healthcare or just call it technology. It's the right amalgamation between healthcare and technology. So it's a health tech organization for sure. And we take a lot of pride in terms of how we've evolved. Having a CTO office within the organization talks volumes about how we are technology driven. It's part of our DNA, if I were to put it that way.
Right.
And from a talent perspective, I think that's what we really move on and go and get talent from.
Right. So the reason why I asked that question, obviously, tech is everywhere, right? I mean, it's omnipresent and you can't really do without it. But when you pitch Indegene, what is your secret sauce of attracting some of the best talent that is out there, especially the tech talent, because that's what we deal with mostly, right? And to that point, I think what we'd also want to know is what are some of the specific technologies that you focus on with respect to, work experience that your candidates already have, or where you want them to be actually, working on?
So the secret sauce is not really us attracting the talent rather than talent choosing the organization. Let me put it that way, right? There are enough tools and platforms in the market for any organization to evaluate tech talent, right? And look at various aspects. What we focus on is clearly an approach that lets you evaluate people on merit based and not, which doesn't have any bias, and hence evaluating talent through technology makes a lot of sense there. When talent looks at us as an organization, they look at how they're going to get internal growth, what is the culture of the organization, opportunities that they're going to have, the learnings, and how they are able to relate to the organization overall. And that's really a secret sauce, if I were to tell it that way. It's not, I don't think so the pull strategy works, or the push rather works so much. It's more on the pull part. So people are relate to us as an organization. They look at multiple aspects, and there is enough on social media nowadays for everybody to really understand how the organization is growing and what value does the organization bring to them into their careers as well. We hire all the way from junior software developers, all the way to senior tech folks, to solution architects, to project managers, senior project managers, to name a few, in the entire spectrum for that matter, right? And it would be myopic on my side to say that, hey, these are the 4 type of technologies or 5 type of technologies that we look at, because it's ever evolving, right? So there are newer things that we continue to hire. And Tarun's team, for example, has been so much of innovation. They keep coming out with newer combination of talent that we can look forward to. And that's what makes it really challenging. So anybody who joins Indegene also gets to do a lot of variety of pieces within the organization, whether it is through cross fungibility or learning new technologies and stuff. It's an ever evolving field. It's not a constant, if I were to say that way.
Right. Got it. So what you're saying is tech stack per se is not very sacrosanct. It's not very rigid. You'd probably hire across the board and then try to groom them for the role as they go along.
Absolutely. And like I said, it'll be incorrect to say that the tech stack is limited to something. There are newer technologies that keep coming around. There are various permutation combinations that keep coming across, and that's what we keep advising to talent also.
Right.
What you hear in a particular technology is not going to take you there. So continue to cross skill, cross leverage, learn, understand newer technologies and stuff like that, and that's what makes the talent much more stronger. Something that we try and bring in talent which have more of an aptitude and attitude to learn and understand and dwell into things much more deeper than just prima facie of it.
Got it. No, that makes total sense. In fact, that resonates with our own philosophy, what Rebecca was earlier talking about. We look at the whole, life cycle of pre-hiring to hiring, and then actually learning and picking up things while you're on the job. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Tarun, question for you. You mentioned, in our initial discussion about AI, and that's like the elephant in the room. We can't really, not address it. So here's a direct question to you. How is that impacting your, your research, your day-to-day operational work? And how do you envision things going forward? Especially, I'm guessing health tech is probably one of the sectors which has so much potential that can be tapped into as far as applying AI is concerned, whether it is to do with image recognition or image processing and things like that, right? So what's your take at it? I mean, how far do you see things going from where we are today? We've seen with COVID, what is possible really, right? How fast organizations were able to turn things around when it came to finding new medicines and doing the drug research that was needed. Would love to hear from you. What's your take?
No, it's a critical piece of the story and has been for a number of years. Even when machine learning and various AI algorithms came to the forefront, certainly they impacted healthcare in a big way because there are very complex problems, computationally intensive problems, as well as scale issues where these algorithms make a difference. And if you look at drug discovery, for example, maybe you're familiar with AlphaFold, right, from Google, and there's other players in that space now. So the ability to actually use those highly sophisticated algorithms to solve protein folding issues and do drug discovery, that was a major obstacle in drug discovery, and now it's leading towards new molecules that can actually help people, right, and in a big way. Internally, within our own organizations, it's a critical tool. There's a mountain of data that we're dealing with. Being able to find the patterns and identify opportunities for optimizations and efficiency gains, that's certainly a critical piece. So you talk about tech stack, and Nitin's exactly right that there's not like we're saying, okay, you need to come in being a JE expert or you need all this CMS and all that. That's true. Those things evolve. What we do look for are people who can write quality, right? Who can basically build something high quality. You understand the domain that we're in is highly regulated and dealing with very sensitive information. So secure coding practices, and critical thinking skills. If you're working on some solution, then while you're working through it, you realize, okay, in these components, I'm dealing with personal health information. Let me make sure the right controls are in place for me to manage that correctly. Let me make sure I've implemented audit trails because the FDA or some authority may come back later on and ask for historical evidence. Let me make sure I've put these things in sort of ledger systems so that I can make sure it's traceable. No one's going to write you all that kind of spoon feed the low level details. A critical thinking person should, puts together these kind of realities and they say, okay, I know I'm dealing with these issues. What do I have to do it right? And so that's the kind of mentorship that we do. And that's actually the progression within the engineering team, is a better understanding of the domain and how you implement it, not necessarily the tools that you use, right? Those tools are evolving constantly. So when it comes to machine learning and AI, is a similar story. What was there 5 years ago is very different from what there is today. And so we as a company, we are definitely not in the business of taking technology and trying to find a problem to shove it into, right? We're the other way around. We know what the problem spaces are. We know where the choke points in the drug discovery through commercialization, that whole drug life cycle. We know where the issues are, and we're trying to figure out how to resolve them. Historically, the way this has been resolved is by headcount. right? Most and today even a lot of companies in this space, if you look at their business plan and their growth is based upon FTE, right? There's just the more bodies you put, the more you get done. That is changing, right? The reality is you're hitting a limit on the practicality of that. And so our point of view is we grow based upon these technology enablers and not by FTE, right? And so that's the machine learning and AI are critical. Past few months, everybody's looking at ChatGPT and these kind of large language models, and that does make a difference in certain areas. But if you really look at the domain carefully, some of the hype is not real, right? There's a lot of things that you think it can solve, but it doesn't, right? And that's actually an opportunity. And what we're seeing is that while I'll give you a good example, one of the big issues in healthcare overall is the overall patient experience. How does the patient interact with their caregivers, the pharma companies, the device companies, the insurance payers? There's a whole ecosystem of people that surround you. And it's amazing how archaic some of these mechanisms are. Even today, they have these very complicated forms for a patient to fill in if they have a severe allergic reaction to a drug. Why should they experience that? If I'm dealing with any other industry, you'll have AI chat assistants, you'll have voice recognition. You can just shoot an email and follow-ups happen automatically. All those things happen, in a much more elegant experience. Why can't healthcare have a very modern experience? Well, AI actually helps us do that now because we're able to do that at scale. The machine is able to be trained on the label and prescribing info. And basically, for example, if you say, hey, I've been taking aspirin and I've been getting some weird reaction on my arm, then the system will ask you, oh, okay, which brand have you been taking? How many milligrams dosage have you been taking? Or are you under the age of 18? Because it knows in the label, there's a difference between what happens if people under 18 and over 18. So you can train the machines with these intelligence and use that to create a better experience for patients and caregivers. And so for us, that's what we're looking for. And we see AI and ML making a big impact in that.
Right. So what you're saying is essentially that there's been a decoupling of sorts where initially we used to believe that you throw FTEs on a problem and it will get solved versus throwing robots and automation at it, and more specifically AI in today's day and age.
Yeah. And what we found actually, the answer has been a human in the loop approach, where you have your experts. At the end of the day, nothing beats a qualified physician or experienced nurse. But what you do is augment them with these tools so they're more productive, they're more efficient, they're also less frustrated in their job, right? They can have a work-life balance that makes sense, yet still get so much accomplished and have a better experience for the consumers of the healthcare, right? So most of our solutions today are designed as a human-in-the-loop processes where we bring in automation. Sometimes it's AI-based, sometimes it's rule-based. There's different forms that it may take on, but we automate those things that can be automated, but then they're also triaged and routed to human experts where appropriate, because the final outcome needs to be the right answer at the high quality with clarity to the end consumer.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense, Tarun. I think, like I was saying earlier, there is a lot of use that we can see within the health tech as far as the AI is concerned. And then within AI, I think there are a lot of angles to how we can actually apply different technologies and different models that are available today. So I think it's very interesting to see that you possibly dealing with a plethora of things and you're sort of creating an ensemble depending on what the problem statement asks you to do. So very, very interesting thoughts on that, Tarun. Thank you for that. Moving on, and this is slightly, tangential, more to do with the organization. So maybe Nitin, you want to kind of take a stab at it first, and maybe Tarun can come in later, given his experience at Indegene as an organization. So Nitin, why don't you shed some light for us in terms of the work culture, right? And how would you define, Indegene's own work culture? What do you think are some of the key elements that sort of constitute that culture for you? And I think my team was telling me that you guys have been awarded some awards very recently as being the best workplace for women. So maybe there's something that you've done specifically in that area. So you want to share something on that?
Sure, absolutely. Clearly, like I mentioned earlier, our culture is our strength. Something that is ingrained as part of our DNA, and not literally on papers. So that's there in spirit. Having a culture that promotes collaboration, trust, empathy, innovation, and very important, an entrepreneurship mindset, like Tarun was mentioning also, right? Where you want to know more and do more than just what is there on the task board. And we've kept a very small acronym for it, which is ENTICE. It entices you further to delve. I think, and we look at this not culture as part of how you hire folks with a certain mindset, but it's there in the entire journey, in the entire employee life cycle, whether it is they go through in learning and development, or during their time during production, or when they are there doing business and stuff like that. So it's the entire journey that they go through it and understand. And clearly, similarly, is the story of diversity and inclusion, something that we live day on day per se, and clearly the testament of the same is the awards that we've been getting around women. Currently, we're approximately 44% on diversity, and the idea is to reach at 50%. And nothing we do really as a mandate in the company. We do it more of what we believe in, and that's the beauty of our culture. Right? We do not have a mandate which says, hey, you need to get an X percentage, you need to drive this as part of culture and stuff like that. I think the way the whole ecosystem or the genome works in our organization is very beautiful. And that's what promotes culture. Culture is not something that you can tell people to follow. It's something that people need to believe in. So once they are in the organization, our employees are able to relate to a lot of pieces that we do, whether it's a corporate social responsibilities, whether it is innovation that we do at hand, a lot of other pieces that continue to happen, how we work. And some of those things have been pre-pandemic, before discussions, before webinars. So it's like I said, it's ingrained. And that's what drives the culture of an organization. That's what really drives here at Indegene. It's clearly something that we all believe in together. Yeah.
Right. That makes sense, Nitin. And I think while I completely agree with your point, and Tarun, maybe this is where you can come in, there is a part of culture which, to my mind, still needs some amount of proactive work, right? And possibly not at later stages of the organization when you already have hundreds of employees or thousands of employees for that matter, right? But maybe in early stages when you have, maybe few tens of employees or maybe 100 odd employees. I think as early employees, as early leaders who are actually contributing to building blocks of that culture, I think there is some amount of proactive work that possibly goes into building that culture. Sometimes when we talk to leaders across the industry, we come across as, hey, possibly you're trying to figure out what is it that you encourage within your organization versus what you discourage, right, openly. And maybe those small little everyday decisions kind of contribute to building the overall culture towards the end of it. What's your take, Tarun? You've been part of the organization. You would have seen the culture actually evolve over a long period of time. What's your take at it?
You're absolutely right. I mean, I've seen the startup from 3 people in a bedroom up to thousands of people across various campuses. And actually, I was just thinking about this the other day, that there are certain inflection points in that journey where things change, right? And especially coming from a startup background, sometimes those inflection points are a bit uncomfortable, but necessary. In the early days, I remember the early days when we're, like you said, less than 10 people. The way we got paid was there was a blank signed checkbook, and you just go write yourself a check, because there was so much trust among people that no one's double checking that, right? And then there was at some magic point you start to realize, whoops, it looks like now we're enough people that there's some stuff happening here. We better put some controls around it. And to this day, I remember the first time we had to hire a controller, a financial controller. Up until then, so those things happen. Then culturally also, there's a diversity of people. People come from different backgrounds. They have different needs. They have different objectives in life. One thing at Indegene that I've been very proud of, and this starts at the very top, from our CEO onwards, been crystal clear that this organization is going to avoid anything to do with office politics, right? So your mind share is on solving problems. It shouldn't be split with ego or jockeying for ownership of something. It's a very collaborative place to work, and you're rewarded and you feel a sense of accomplishment when you see the outcomes for this, when you actually see the data come in showing that, oh, you made a big difference for 100,000 people across Europe by getting this drug a little bit cheaper, or by identifying some root safety issue that was addressed. That's a sense of accomplishment. Or even on the business side, you see a Pfizer or an AstraZeneca or Novartis realize a large potential opportunity with a product that is you were part of, right? And so that's something I appreciate a great deal of. And I think when you're immersed in a single domain and you start to build your expertise over time in that domain, you understand it, the nuances of it better. You also appreciate the rewards of it better. And so I really like being in this life sciences space and seeing that journey along the way. And culturally speaking, I think that's a big part of what fuels us.
Got it. Makes sense. In fact, as HackerEarth, we're dealing with a lot of organizations across the globe, all shapes and sizes, all kinds of domains. And while we, take pride in being able to assess all the tech skills, of course, culture is a tough nut to crack. And I'm hoping one day we'll be able to solve that as well. But it's a tough problem. I mean, while we may say, hey, we're looking for a culture fit, I'm honestly not very sure if that's even the right approach. Sometimes, like you said, Tarun, I mean, people come from diverse backgrounds and they may not on day one fit your culture, and sometimes those people also evolve and your organization also evolves with them. So it's a tough problem, and I'm sure you guys have put in a lot of effort to actually make things happen the way they have at Indegene. But yeah,
and there's no silver bullet, like you're saying. We've made mistakes along the way, and we still do, right? But what's interesting also I've learned is that people also change, right? When you immerse somebody who came from one culture and moving into they actually, right? And so I've seen examples of folks who came from companies that had a very different approach towards growth and towards your career trajectories. And in the beginning, you almost feel like they were counterproductive and that maybe they weren't a fit.
Right.
But then they start to appreciate, right? And so I think it's up to us as in the organization to work with folks, mentor them, and respect the diversity, right? We are evolving also as a company. We're making shifts and we're learning from the people that come in, and the reverse is also true.
Right. Cool.
Just to add before you go, I think we tend to focus a lot on the mindset. Culture is more of a mindset, if you really ask me, right? And that's the beauty about what we drive. So there is no set prescription about how to check talent around culture. You don't want to have everybody exactly tuned in, in the same fitment, but people who carry a very open mindset. And like Tarun mentioned, once people come in an organization, they realize what the culture is. The adoption is much faster rather than telling 2:2, and this is how it is. So I think the mindset is very important, and that's what we really look in talent. How open, what sort of mindset do they really bring to the table, right? Apart from the domain part, because it's not really getting culturally fit people. It's about people who carry a certain sort of mindset that lets them adapt, bring in their own uniqueness to the picture. And that's where the culture evolves. That's where the organizations also evolve a lot.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, just delving a little deeper on that point, I think it helps if the organization is able to label what are some of those values or mindsets that you were potentially looking for, because then you can figure out, okay, there is probably an overlap and there's probably a mismatch, and these are some of the dimensions that you want the person to actually work on. But diversity is a great point. So sometimes, we hire diverse candidates just for the fact that they bring those out of the box ideas onto the table, and that helps evolve the culture as well. And we some years down the line might realize that there's been a butterfly effect of hiring one person at some point in time who's actually impacted our culture 5 years down the line. Who knows? I mean, these things are pretty complicated. But yeah, thanks for sharing that point. Cool. So moving on, Tarun, one question, and this is where I want you to sort of go into a little bit of more specifics if you can. Our audiences, we have a community of north of 7-8 million developers globally, right? Who interact with our platform. Either they are learning technologies, or they are participating in hackathons, or they are just appearing for tests for companies like Indegene and whatnot, right? It's a huge global community, and most of it is around software development skills and the tech stacks that we talked about earlier. Do you want to give some specifics? What are those technologies that you currently deploy and currently use within Indegene, and what are some of those technologies that you are potentially looking to use going forward?
Yep. Yeah. So if I look at a snapshot of where things are at today, let's start on the data side. So there we are looking at, people refer to it as the modern data stack. So having understanding graph databases, right? So Neo4j or Neptune, those are Cosmos DB. Those are all good to know. We also, Databricks is very useful for us. We're also working with actually some of the a little bit more bleeding edge, like Trino, which maybe some folks may not be as familiar with. Trino is the evolution of Presto, which you may know from back in the Facebook days, but it's a federated querying system. So combining those in Munson and DBT, basically there's a whole kind of ecosystem well known in the modern data stack. So that's there from our data ops side, and with the goal of creating high efficiency data ingestion, quality checking, and querying ability. And that feeds into our ML ops side. So their ML flow is very useful to know. Even getting certified with the major cloud. So we're heavy AWS on our end, but we also use GCP and Azure as well. But if you are familiar with like the well-architected guidelines from AWS and are familiar with things like SageMaker and best practices on model building, because there's a difference between understanding the basics of it versus building something that's production ready, right? And so building a model that's suitable for deployment into a production environment. MPM, model performance management, is actually a very interesting space, and there are tools that are worth looking at in there. And being able to understand that, all right, once I've deployed machine learning into our solution, how can I be sure that it's actually working, right? How do I deal with things like data drift and bias that may be happening in a production environment and dashboard and correct it? So those are tools good. So that's the data side. On the application side, actually it's very classic 3-tier web apps, right? So right now, a lot of it is Python, Django, kind of interfaces. We do a number of RESTful APIs, whether it's API Gateway on AWS, or you want to use Flask, those or similar fast API. Those are all tools that we use. But there are also Java, enterprise Java is there, and it's very common in the healthcare industry. Right. We don't go too bleeding edge, like we're not doing Rust right now. Those kinds of things. So we do tend to adopt technologies and languages that have some track record in the healthcare and life sciences space. It helps deal with things such as GXP and testing when you have something that's a little bit more kind of established out there. But in our R&D, we have a tech R&D arm of the company. We do go to the bleeding edge to see, is there something that we should at least publish a point of view around or have a playbook for in case in the future. So right now, Indegene does not have any production products working with blockchain, for example, right? So, but looking at Solidity and smart contracts and some of the capabilities there makes sense for certain use cases. So we have an R&D arm that's looking at it, but it's other than supply chain, it's not really used in other side of healthcare in a large way. But 3 years from now, that could be a different story. So we are trying to keep on the bleeding edge on the R&D side. Metaverse is another one, right? So there's so much money going into metaverse, and the question big enterprise pharma is asking, what's our play here, right? I mean, do we need to be in there or not? And so today it's early days. Indegene does work with some of these more forward-looking companies, but it's mostly in education and simulation and training within pharma with these devices. But we've also seen, and there's clinical evidence to show this, that there are use cases where having a patient remotely engage with their physician through the immersive experience of the headset is actually gives you better data than doing it like through a Zoom call. And that is applicable like in clinical trials and like in mental health. If you're doing a clinical trial and certain points of that trial protocol have you at home having a remote call with your doctor, you may be better off doing it with these devices, right? And for example, there's a finger test where you basically touch each finger with your thumb. And when you do it through the headset, it's able to more precisely measure those attributes that are then used to calculate some score, right? Which is better, and it works better than Zoom. So we're starting to think of these devices almost as wearables, right? Nowadays wearables are there at scale, right? And so why wouldn't these kind of immersive devices become in that same category? So from a tech perspective, we do look for folks who can adopt that bleeding edge, look at what are the latest technologies, how can we start to utilize these devices in new ways. But at the core, that modern data stack, modern ML ops stack, and a more classic web application architecture is there, and the well-architected guidelines, secure coding, working in private VPCs in environments, audit trails, all those things are commodities, right? Part of the story.
Right. That's super helpful, Tarun. In fact, for our developer audience, I'd like to point out that when we think about pharma and big pharma and health tech, somehow there is an image of legacy systems that immediately crops up. And it's funny that when you talked about your database and data stack, you didn't even once mention anything close to Oracle and MySQL and whatnot. And I think that just goes to show that you guys are at the edge and basically leading the innovation for the pharma companies. And I'm really excited to see what's happening in your space. Application, like you said, I think it's a slightly more conventional way of developing with the conventional stacks. And that makes sense because that's the need of the hour as far as the domain is concerned. You don't want to sort of experiment too much when it comes to health, use cases. That makes a lot of sense. And of course, security and compliance, I think, are big drivers for you when you choose technologies. So of course, well-architected framework that I think AWS evangelizes quite a lot makes a lot of sense, even from development practices perspective and how your overall setup of the infrastructure is. Very, very interesting. And to be honest, I'm pleasantly surprised by some of the things that you guys are working on. So thank you so much for sharing that. Very helpful. Very, very helpful. Cool. So, moving on, and this is probably, Nitin, maybe you can take a stab first and then we can go to, Tarun. Let's talk a little bit about, recruiting process in general, right? And since we deal with that, we like to know from our partners and our customers, what are they doing about recruiting? What sort of processes do they follow? Because there has been a lot of change, especially post-pandemic, right? Pre-pandemic, if you told someone that we'll hire a full-time person without even seeing them face-to-face once, they'll be quite shocked. And today we are shocked the other way around, which is, why do you need a face-to-face interview? Why can't you just get on a Zoom call and get things done, right? So there's been a sea change in how we're doing things. From a process perspective, Nitin, where do you see yourself? What are some of the key elements of your recruiting process that you want to talk about?
Sure. So, Vishal, I'll probably allude to one of the points from your previous question also. I think while we do hire for newer technologies, right, but there'll be the earlier ones also. So, slowing downs or dying skills versus new age skills, right? There has to be a balance between the two. It just can't be one-sided approach. But clearly, and that's where the whole probability of people evolving and understanding and learning and honing their skills on newer technologies is very, very important, right? Now, coming to your point around our recruitment process is pretty lean and simple. You have the recruitment part, and then we have where you evaluate the skill set, do the basic skills checking, Post that, we've deployed HackerEarth to basically check on person's knowledge on their domain part and stuff like that. And then we have a business SME doing the evaluation. Like Tarun mentioned, the human loop is very, very important. And I think that's there in all aspects for that matter, right? Technology tends to become a catalyst more of something that's able to enable decision making. By the end of the day, you should know, looking at the permutation combination, what fits well. We do a lot of hiring which is focused on skill based, right? And hence deep domain knowledge is the fundamental for anyone who's applying at Indegene for that matter. Understanding of the base structures, is I personally feel is equally important by knowing the advanced levels. So you can't compromise on the basics of knowing how to code, what are the basics, initial stages for that matter, and just knowing the advanced level. So I think that part is very important. And a lot of people we see, the knowledge base becomes very hollow when you do not know the base structures. It's like saying, I do not know the concept of vowels and I'm still able to speak good grammar, right? I think that makes a difference there. Then we give a lot of strength to, how talent brings in a lot of fungibility and adaptability. We look at that pieces from a talent perspective, and an approach from a coding perspective. What is the solution approach that they took? Not really the solution. The end solution will practically be the same. But what is the approach that they really took? How much of hands-on are they, right? Knowing technologies and being really hands-on makes a lot of difference. And again, going back to what Tarun was mentioning, people who know the art would know how to really have an impact, not really in that area, but how does it have a ripple effect on the rather overall system. So we look at relevant experience, any specific exposure into programming languages, what is the problem solving approach, what is the logical thinking that people bring to the table. I think that's very, very critical. Again, modules that they would have worked on, some design patterns and stuff like that. And in all, I think the process is very clear, but there is again one thin line, but very critical that I want to bring in is with a lot of technology being coming into the picture, we've seen people creating Holocaust also in terms of not knowing it, and as HackerEarth, you must be also dealing it. We deal with a lot of impersonation cases and stuff like that, where people present themselves to be something else. Sooner or later, it comes to the light. So my one piece of advice to talent and recruiters is definitely enter what you know, do what you are good at, and bring that forward. Your strength has to come forward rather than covering it up, because it's not about getting a job in any organization. It's more about how you excel it, how you create a value system for yourself and for the organization in the long run. So that's what we really look at, and that's what I would suggest that developers to really look at as well when they're applying it in Indegene.
Got it. Thanks, Tarun. Tarun, to you, a slightly different aspect of, again, the recruiting process. When we talk to our customers, obviously we talk to the TA teams and we talk to, the hiring managers and engineering leaders, right? Sometimes we hear from engineering leaders directly that, hey, why don't we test our candidates on more questions like full stack development? Are they able to actually write database queries and then tie them up to actual applications? Can they spin up a quick and dirty application where we can see their skills end to end? Sometimes they'll say, hey, can they actually run a small data analysis script in Python or R and just analyze maybe 2-3 GB of data and see if they are able to. So it's a very, very hands-on, skill-centric approach that we follow. But what's your when you talk to the Nitin's team, for instance, right? How do you do that handshake in terms of what am I looking for when I'm hiring developers? What does that handshake actually entail?
Yeah, well, I've been very fortunate. We have a very strong talent group, and Nitin is certainly a key member of that. But so they actually I think they've kind of learned the patterns that come from the engineering folks. So it makes my job much easier. We can usually come in and say, hey, I'm working on this product suite and I'm short a couple of hands. So I'm looking for somebody who, and we can give a very simple bulleted list of, I'm looking for somebody who can build a web app that deals with, a certain type of technology stack for that solution, and who can collaborate well with the team. But it's an interesting conundrum, because I'm a firm, big believer on the engineering side, at least, we need people who are truly have experience hands-on. And it's at all levels. Doesn't matter from, if you're at the most entry level, you'll have some project work or you've got your certifications and all that. And if you're at a senior level, you should have a strong track record. But I'll tell you, even me, I still write code every day. Right, just about every day. I do code reviews every day, and I also go through webinars and educational sessions every day. As a matter of fact, my calendar is structured. 2 hours every morning is just going through RSS feeds, and I have a collection of different news channels that I follow to see what's going on, and I code. And so I would expect that if you come in and saying my job is just to delegate and dashboard, I've done my duty of 10 years of coding. Right. That doesn't fly. The problem is, how do you evaluate that? And I'm not sure that forcing somebody to write code over a Zoom call works. And whether they succeed or fail, that's just that moment in time, right? And if you're working as a team and you're working on a project in a better setting, maybe it would have been a different story. So what I usually try to do is, when I'm interviewing a candidate, we'll kind of zoom in on some project they've worked on in the past, and just ask some very nuanced, detailed questions, explanations that could only be answered by somebody who was hands-on in there, right? And 9 times out of 10, you can tell whether somebody is just familiar with the brochure of the solution versus they actually were in the trenches writing it, right? And I don't necessarily need them in front of my face to write code. We can get there through that kind of query. But so in some way, being able to articulate and talk in depth about your hands-on ability, the kind of problems you've solved, what you've learned along the way, how you continue to learn, how you collaborate with people in your team, what was your role within the team, overall. And then many people are coming to Indegene looking for the next step up in their career. Right. And so we try to get into, well, okay, if you're going to move up to the next step, what do you think you need to succeed in that next step, right? And you can tell from the way the answer to the question whether is genuine or not.
Makes sense. I think a lot of what you said actually overlaps with our thought process when we try and develop our product as well. In fact, and this could be a closing question because we are just about time. So maybe, feel free, any one of you can take this. But one of the things that we've been talking to our customers about is, when it comes to top of the funnel sourcing of tech candidates, right? You could potentially just ignore resumes to a large extent and just focus on skills, right? And we've had case studies after case studies where we've gone to customers, they have actually, assessed tens of thousands of candidates without even, and it's not possible to actually go through 10,000 resumes in a short period of time. So you just make them go through that test and filter out the top 10%. That creates a much, much better pool for them. Is that a philosophy that you guys also sort of believe in, or do you want to try that out going forward? What's your take? Like, how important is it?
I can tell you from my end on that, it's spot on. And matter of fact, these days, resumes are, you don't even know whether the person even wrote the resume or not, right? It's a whole difference, but you're absolutely right. And actually today more than ever, there's such an amazing environment of online courseware, ways for people to learn these really important skill sets on their own. And when you're motivated, you'll outperform the person who went to school because they were forced to go through a curriculum. So I 100% agree that it's not really about the resume, it's about the skills. And if there's a mechanism where you can actually start to screen and identify those skills, right? Through, whether it's testing or hackathons or other types of events, that's great. And I know that for me personally, I very seldom do I pay close attention to the individual line items of the resume. I'm actually mostly looking at the skill set section because we know that's what we're going to be probing them on when we interview.
Right.
Exactly. I completely concur with Tarun. I would say it's more on the talent part. For any applications, for example, if it's a Java full stack, we will have people who do not know the full stack also applying. I think that is a different problem altogether. One obviously is looking at the skills per se and screening people through skills. But the more important part is people understanding what role they're applying at. Right. Once you do that, you're yourself more relevant to the job. Right. It tends to reduce your frustration also when you're applying as a candidate. And I think that's very important. Right. So the platforms basically need to have some sort of pre-filtering mechanism of probing people into those spheres and then making them go through the evaluation. It's no point putting multiple lakhs, thousands of folks basically through evaluation for them to realize that, hey, I've not made the cut. Right. Rather than them understanding that this is the nature or this is the level of my knowledge that is needed here. These are the specifics, domain, deep expertise expected. And then I apply for a particular or appear for a particular assessment, go through it and say, hey, this is what I'm bringing to the table. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of pre-self-assessment, figuring out, hey, it's not about my pedigree and it's more about my skills. I think that's what we're hearing. And to the developer audience who's probably listening in or probably will listen to this in future. I mean, you're hearing it from, so to say, the horse's mouth. Don't invest a lot of time, polishing your resumes by the latest, greatest resume builder tools. All of that might be okay, but really you need to invest on your skills, and that's what is ultimately going to help you. So thank you so much, Tarun and Nitin, for patiently taking all these questions. Really, grateful for that. Rebecca, do we want to take any audience questions at this point?
I think we can do maybe the first one that came in, at least, because that came in quite early on.
Sure.
So I'll just read it out here. Ashish Mahajan has asked, given the fact that there is a huge skill gap and dearth of talent in the market, in this scenario, how is Indegene getting prepared for the hiring boom, which you talked about?
Okay. So I personally, as a TA leader, don't believe there is a skill gap. There is a skill gap for the right fit. Like we say that there is, everybody can get a job, everybody can learn, right? It's the right mapping. Right. As an organization, not only we look at skills that are tailor-made, but we look at attitude and aptitude of people. I think looking at people with that mindset is very important. You can get a person who's a tailor fit to a particular requirement, but tomorrow fungibility plays a big role, and that is all on what the person brings to the table. We have our in-house upskillment programs, multiple areas that we let people dwell, get internally certified, get externally certified. We have train and hire programs, to name a few, and that's what is important. For any organization to scale up, what is important is to not really look at the end product, but how it will evolve. I think that helps you not only increase the pool size, but number of people who can apply and get their jobs done. So anybody who's looking forward to joining Indegene, clearly you need to have good strength on your domain part and a mindset that is open to learning and doing things. Tarun, you want to share your views on that?
I think you're dead on, but I'd also add that when we say domain, you don't have to come from a healthcare or a life science domain, right? We actually, some of our most innovative products were inspired by solutions we see in other spaces. So, for example, edutech is very interesting, right? Online distance learning, it used to be just a video and audio type of didactic format. And then over time, it evolved into interactive things. And today, people have learned so much about the psychology of learning online. And so those same behavior profiling we do in edutech, well, that also applies to commercial marketing for pharmaceutical products. It actually applies to patient behavior tracking, right? Physician behavior tracking. Same thing in fintech, aerospace, all these spaces are applicable. So if you come from a background where you learn how to go in depth in a domain, and you have at least the core basic fundamentals we talked about earlier, certain critical thinking skills, and on the engineering side, at least an understanding of best practices and what the definition of quality is, then you'll succeed.
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you, Tarun. We have another question, and you can tell me if you're open to answering it now, or we can just ask them to reach out to you later. I think there are two questions that have come in on the scope for hiring women in tech at Indegene, and how Indegene is encouraging women in tech. I think because of your recent award and everything, quite known now that Indegene is the place to go for women in tech. So would you like to give us like a short answer on that?
Sure, absolutely. We run events from time to time, specific programs. So like I mentioned earlier, diversity for us is not something has to be done on papers, but we personally believe in equal opportunity to everyone. So if the person is fitting the bill for technology, whether it's a male or female, absolutely, by all means, right? And that is what has encouraged a lot of people. We have a lot of hybrid working model, which also encourages a lot of women to basically apply for technology, right? And that's what has really led us to this space, and encouragement of internal mentorship, coaching programs that happen, a lot of other avenues that we open within the organization, which actually promote women to actually come up in technology. I think it's a matter of who knows the stuff better gets to do it. Yeah.
Right. Definitely. With that, I think we've come to the end. The other two questions are also just, excuse me, about different roles that Indegene is hiring for right now, which I'm sure is available on your website for everyone to see there, and all the open positions there. So thank you, Tarun, thank you, Nitin, thank you, Vishy, for joining us at this session. Thank you for all your insights, a lot of takeaways from the whole thing. And we hope to have you again soon. To everyone in our audience right now, please do fill in our survey form. Tell us how you liked the webinar and any topics that you'd like to see in the future. Thank you once again for joining us, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tarun, for staying up late for this. I know it's almost midnight.
Yes. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Good to talk to you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you both. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Catch up again. Bye-bye.